of Electricity Human Resources Canada. Electricity Human Resources Canada, or EHRC, for those of you who don't know us, we are a national non-for-profit organization that researches human resources challenges and opportunities in the electricity sector, and we develop the tools to address them. We bring together industry stakeholders to provide both a national and a provincial perspective on issues that are affecting the sector, and we're the only national electricity organization that supports HR and skills development and ensures industry stakeholders across Canada have a voice. Now, today's Succession Planning Guidebook is the latest in a range of tools to support the demographic changes that we see occurring in the sector. That includes, of course, the move towards renewables and lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and of course, the impact of digital and technological innovation. So disruption is all around us. Make no mistake, we are in a war for talent. We can no longer depend on poaching from each other in the sector. Indeed, we actually face competition from other industries. With long lead times to full competencies in many of our occupations and many roles being portable in and out of this sector, we need to plan accordingly, and this guidebook has been developed to help you plan for both your current and future workforce needs. I would like to thank our partners, the Government of Alberta, who have supported this project, as well as our steering committee here in Alberta, who have so graciously given their time to guide the work. Thank you so much to Fortis Alberta, NMAX Corporation, the Alberta Electric System Operator, AESO, TransAlta, ATCO, and Capital Power Corporation. Now, I'm going to now hand you over to today's moderator, Anita Gara. Anita is EHRC's Western representative and the project lead for the Succession Planning Initiative. Anita will speak to our succession planning guide, provide some context, and introduce our guests today. I know I'm very much looking forward to the discussion and to their insights, and I do encourage you to ask questions during our Q&A. So Anita, over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today as we launch the Succession Planning Guidebook. As Michelle mentioned, I am Calgary-based, so I would like to take this opportunity before we begin to quickly acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. It's always exciting when we launch a new resource here at Electricity Human Resources Canada. The timing of launching a new succession planning guidebook for Alberta's electricity sector and beyond couldn't be more appropriate. The shifts in the workplace related to the pandemic and the sheer pace of change the electricity industry is facing, talent has never been more important to the success of an organization, and organizations now more than ever need to be prepared. So what is this guidebook? The Succession Planning Guidebook is a straightforward and practical reference that includes best practice process descriptions to manage succession planning in your organization. So whether you're just getting started with or looking to make improvements to your existing plan. To develop this guidebook, we had the privilege of working with the Government of Alberta in partnership with the Canadian government. We've also drawn on our latest labor market information intelligence study data, as well as our unique national view of what's happening in the electricity industry. And that includes assessments of several organizations' current succession planning programs. The work was led and supported by a steering committee of experienced HR practitioners from across the sector. The result is a framework for effective succession planning and management, including how to define critical roles and positions and competencies, identify and develop successor employees, manage talent pipelines, and communicate your succession strategy throughout your organization. The guidebook, it also covers key points of theory and process and provides practical tools and worksheets for collecting and analyzing information you'll need to develop a succession plan. I would like to point out that the Succession Planning Guidebook does make a distinction between succession management and succession planning. The guidebook states that succession management is the systematic and planned process an organization uses to identify and develop the critical skills and competencies it requires, whereas succession planning is the focus process for keeping talent in the pipeline by identifying and developing people to be appointed to selected critical positions when required. So I would just like for us to keep that in mind for the duration of this session. So the guidebook is now available on our website at electricityhr.ca. It is available in English and in French and digital first versions. I encourage you to go check it out, knowing that we are here every step of the way for you to support you in your succession planning journey. So before we begin the panel session, I would like to remind our audience to mute your microphones for the duration of the session. Questions can be asked via the chat box, and if we do run out of time, we can touch base with you after this session individually via email. And this session is also being recorded. So, excuse me. So as I previously mentioned, the development of the Succession Planning Guidebook was led and supported by a steering committee of experienced HR practitioners from across the sector. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today 3 of those members who will focus the conversation around succession planning in electricity organizations. They include Sheila L., our steering committee chair and director, talent acquisition, talent management, and pension and benefits at ATCO. Sheila is a strategic resource-oriented senior leader in talent practice area of HR, including recruiting, onboarding, leadership development, succession management, coaching, engagement, and well-being. Sheila has over 15 years experience leading high-performance teams and has worked with Canadian Tire, Intact Insurance, ATB, and ATCO. She graduated from the University of Calgary with a master's in leadership. Our next panelist is Tisha Iglesias, Manager, Talent and Partners and Inclusion at the Alberta Electric System Operator. Tisha has 20 years professional practice in human resources in healthcare, information technology, and the utility sector. She currently leads a dynamic business partner team at the ISO with oversight of talent management programs, as well as inclusion and diversity. An MRU alumni and graduate from the University of Lethbridge, Tisha is a wife and a mother. She strives to living a purpose-driven life, learn new things, and pay it forward to help others thrive. Our final panelist is Nicole Patey, Director, Talent Strategies and HR Business Partnering at NMAX Corporation. Nicole is a senior human resource leader with over 20 years of progressive strategic HR and marketing experience. Nicole joined NMAX Corporation in 2019, where she works with stakeholders throughout the organization to deliver innovative program design, provide strategic partnership, and align the HR strategy with the overall corporate direction. Nicole's HR experience includes leading teams in health promotion, talent management, and HR advisory services in academic, energy resources, and public service sectors. And with a commitment to lifelong learning, Nicole has completed multiple graduate certificate programs through Royal Roads University and graduated from the organizational coaching program at the University of British Columbia in April 2018. So welcome panelists. It's a pleasure having you here with us as we launch the Succession Planning Guidebook. I just want to get right into it and ask you this. So many people think succession planning should be limited to those at the top of the organization chart. How important do you feel it is to look at mission critical positions across the organization? So maybe Nicole, we can start with you.
Yeah, and thank you, Anita. Thank you for having me here today. You know, too often we tend to plan for leadership roles, and I don't think we can lose sight of those roles that are critical to our operation. When I think about succession planning, you know, I kind of fashion it similar. You know, we buy insurance to protect against floods. We have security systems for security purposes, and we back up our data to protect our company. And your succession plan is your business continuity insurance. That requires grooming of your employees. And we saw a lot of this during the pandemic, right? When we needed to identify our critical roles. I think many of us in Canada were quite lucky compared to some of our friends down south who were more impacted. I was talking to someone last week where quite a bit of their workforce was out in their safety sensitive critical roles, and they were able to leverage their succession plan for those that were off ill or that were out for quarantining purposes. So I think it's extremely critical that we do look beyond leadership roles and those roles that keep the core operations going and that are either safety sensitive and are required for business continuity purposes. I don't know, Sheila, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So to add to that, I would also look at what it is, the skills that's going to be required over the next 10 years, because that is changing. And so it may not necessarily be a formal leadership role, because we are getting into a space where you're managing projects in a matrixed environment, and that requires a different level of expertise. So have we actually identified what that would look like and how critical that would be to the success for the organization moving forward? So you may have this informal ability to lead P&L in a huge project with certain skills, and are we good at identifying that? Because we could have that talent walk out the door because there isn't anything that's really engaging to them, and now they're going to start to see that moving forward, because it's not going to necessarily be like what we've seen in the past where everything's full-time work or everything a leadership role as a director or VP. It could be these special projects that 2 to 3 year terms, but they're critical to the organization. How do we keep them on different projects? So I would just add in that from what you were saying, Nicole.
Interesting, very interesting. Okay, so I do have a two-part question that definitely ties in with this. And so who owns responsibility for the succession planning process? So is it just the HR manager, or who else needs to be involved, and how? And how do you advise HR leaders in making succession a priority for their organization and getting that necessary buy-in from management? Tisha, how about you?
Sure, thank you. I believe that succession planning it's a business process, and HR is there to help the organization enable that process, to partner with them through those conversations, to help them look micro and macro, trying to look at, as Nicole and Sheila mentioned, start thinking about these critical roles and the impact they have in the organization. Start thinking about, the future of talent and what's happening in the space around talent in the workplace, and people being able to have that talent fluidity in an organization to move around where you have those needs, but then those also open up other development opportunities for others in the organization as well too. And I think that's also critically important. And as Nicole said, the impact of the pandemic lately has really brought to the forefront how organizations really need to think critically around this process from a business perspective, and look at it as a business contingency and risk management as well too, so that in an unprecedented times of something like a pandemic, you can still survive and hopefully thrive through that, in terms of the business operations and the strategic priorities of the organization.
Okay. Nicole, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think Tisha really captured that quite nicely. And where I have been able to coach leaders on this is how do you make it real for them and help them understand, and especially those that might have hard to recruit roles, what would be the impact to you if this role is vacant for 6 months? And not only that, but we all know, the orientation, the uptake, getting people up to speed and up to productivity. So really trying to make it real for leaders, and really trying to tie it into the talent chain for them as well, so they can actually see the impact to it. And then I think the other thing as well that I like to offer organizations in this is, if you have a reputation of being an organization that invests in their talent, makes it part of their system, it's another lever for attraction, especially those that want to come in and grow their career. So there are other benefits outside of the risk mitigation piece as well.
Okay, sounds good. I was going to save the questions for the end, but I do see one question that ties in directly to the conversation we're having now. And the question is, do you see more people becoming contractors versus full-time permanent employees? How do you feel about that statement?
I just wrote it. I think it'll be a balance. I don't think you'll see one overtake the other. It's just, we do have like different, at least in my area where I work with ATCO Enterprise, is that we have full-time employees, we have part-time employees, and then we have gig workers, which means they can be here 2 to 5 years and could continue being here, that move into permanent as well. So it's just the flexibility that we need to look at to accommodate what's important also for that individual. So what matters to the employee as well as what matters to ATCO. It's a two-way relationship. But I think sometimes the reason why I was going there is that we tend to forget about that when we do succession planning. Like we don't necessarily identify them as critical to the organization.
Right. Good point, Sheila.
Tisha, do you want to comment on that point?
Yeah, no, I just an extension of that, and I think too the other piece around succession planning is that it does feed into other key critical processes, and I think Nicole kind of touched on that when she talked about, you know, how to just position the why and make it real and meaningful to a business leader, and the downstream impacts of just not planning now. So, you know, succession planning also has impacts into your workforce planning, and even to what Sheila's saying too, you know, how do we leverage contingent workers, and how do we leverage other valuable, you know, components of the workforce that all provide value to help enable other things. And then succession planning also feeds into your talent acquisition, because then, you know, you're starting to think about then, you know, future growth or just new skills in the organization that maybe you have to buy those. You're not ready yet to build that internally, or just adding on to, as Sheila had mentioned earlier, just what's happening 5-10 years down for the organization from a strategy perspective, and where do we need to shift and pivot from a talent strategy. So it's very interconnected, and definitely not just like a silo lens of replacement charts, which, you know, that's what succession planning has been in the past, right?
Okay. So I've heard it said that an organization's people and talent capital needs need to be approached as wisely as their financial capital needs. Would you agree with that statement, and why? Sheila, perhaps you can take this one.
Sure. Kind of talking through what we were originally, when Nicole was going on to risks and mitigating of risks. When we look at financial capital, a lot of times there's a conversation on a regular basis, monthly, let's just use monthly as the example, where you would go in and have this conversation of where you are with your KPIs. But what tends to happen is the people part gets ignored, and it should have the same rigor, where we're talking about how our people on a regular basis. And why that's becoming more and more important because of the war for talent. But what we're seeing is there are the people-related risks that the pandemic has put the employees' physical, mental, social, and financial health in the spotlight. So when we look at succession, or when we look at how that impacts it, we have to highlight those exposures. And how do we do succession planning when it comes to this, and how can it be managed? So that's the dialogue where we really need to start thinking through. And do we have the appropriate tools as HR practitioners to help our managers know how to engage in those conversations on a monthly basis, just like we would with a financial capital KPI?
Does anyone want to?
So I'll give you sorry, I'll go one.
Yeah. Absolutely, we have time. We have plenty of time.
I'll give one more piece of an example. Like, are we going to just talk about, we have someone ready now, like we would traditionally, or are we going to have more a dynamic conversation around our people? And successors can be cross-functional, not just a replacement to one role. So what are those conversations that we're having? What are those KPIs that we're really looking at? What kind of story are we trying to tell?
It seems
Yeah.
very logical. Sorry, Tisha, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, and Sheila, I really resonate with that, and even bringing data to that conversation as well too, because, you know, if you take the finance lens, you know, they say that the devil's in the details, right? And sometimes you do need to bring that data towards that conversation to help enable that ready for now. I think that's such a key one, where it's sometimes it's very you know, well, what does that mean? And ready for what? And where does the organization truly need these skills and capabilities that this person holds that we're saying is ready now? And looking broader than just maybe that divisional or departmental, you know, line that they're in. Do they have other capabilities in the organization that's a need that we want to actually move and fulfill? And so I think that's where, you know, bringing in this holistic conversation around the talent and making it to your point, very meaningful, not just for the exercise, but for the organization as a whole, and where the organization is needing to go and trying to go, from a strategy and also from a talent strategy perspective.
Nicole, did you have something to say? Okay, all right, sounds good. So I have a two-part question, and it's about what is the biggest misconception about effective succession planning, and why would you recommend the EHRC Succession Planning Guidebook? Tisha, perhaps you could comment?
Sure. You know, just from my own perspective, I think a big misconception is that there's a perfect way or a perfect model, or and I don't think there is a perfection. I think that, you know, every organization has a starting point wherever they are, and you evolve and you go through probably some growing pains, and you'll go through growing pains at different cycles as you continue to go through that process. But I think a big misconception is thinking that it's owned by, you know, HR, and that, you know, it's their thing to do, and to drive, and I really think that it's not. It's HR really helping to enable the business to really go through this business planning, but be there as a partner and the supporter. And I also think that sometimes, you know, there's always lessons learned, and what may be perceived as not getting it right, and that's okay. Sometimes those are purposeful, and sometimes at the being on the HR side of things, you aren't always able to influence in the moment in time, but it doesn't necessarily fall on deaf ears, and eventually you'll be able to see shifts as long as you really try to, as Nicole said, meet people where they are, and try to make it very real and meaningful for them, and understand what that pressure point is for the business or for the leader, and try to meet them there and help them to see where it is. So it's not easy, and I don't think it's a one model fits all, or a one model is a perfect. I think that it's something that many organizations adapt and grow through, but again, it's a partnership effort, with the business driving it and HR supporting it. And why would I recommend the guidebook? I think the guidebook has great content in there that is practical. And I think that the practical applications of the guidebook are so helpful for any organization, regardless of where you are in your own internal practice and process around succession planning. And so it's quite refreshing, because it really allows you to really just think through that if you're on the HR side of things, and to really, you know, challenge your own thinking as to what you're doing, and also bring some other components to the conversation, and perhaps even the delivery. And from a leader perspective, it's great to be able to start to get yourself into that mindset and thinking around, you know, this planning process, and its meaning and its intent, and try to think broader around that, not just going through the motion, but the communication strategy around that as well too. So those are the things that I find extremely valuable from the guidebook.
Sheila, how about yourself?
Yeah, so where I think it's very helpful is that it's agile in that you choose to use certain piece of it because that's where it works for you, for your maturity level as an organization. So it may not make sense for you to use all pieces, but if you really want to focus on here because that's your biggest pain point or priority, then do it. And that's how I feel it was really quite helpful versus I have to do all steps in order for succession planning to be successful. Because we all know life gets busy, we get busy, we don't always have the time to follow through on absolutely everything. But if we had something we can pick up and use and it's easy to use, then we can use it. And so that's how I feel this is a benefit, is that you can do that with this.
Nicole, would you like to add something?
Yeah, no, I just echo what everyone says. It's a scalable tool. So if you don't have any processes to be able to identify what are critical positions are, I think we've all been in organizations where people feel everyone is critical. Everyone's important. Not everyone's critical. And, I love how the process, it's very clear and it gives some great guidelines. And, if you are in an advanced process, it gives you some ideas around development planning. Again, what Tisha was talking about, how to start activating it, taking it from a plan, pulling it through the system and making it real. So yeah, those are a few things.
There's a question from the audience that ties in again to the conversation right now. And it says, should progression paths be publicly available to staff can see where they transfer their skills versus going through HR? How do you feel about that statement? I open the floor.
So I'm trying to interpret, so I hope understand the question, but I'll take a little bit of it. How's that? And then we can go from there. But when I see that, I think it's about making it transparent that you've put the effort as the individual into your development. And then if I think about it a bit further, because that's where we're working through right now is inclusive leadership. So when we do succession planning, that we aren't taking in our own bias. So transparent can help with that. So there's one side of where I see that's important is to be able to show your progression of where you're developing and having that transparent as to where you want to go on your career trajectory. But I'm not sure progression paths be publicly available if I hit that right as to what the question fully said. So hopefully that answers part of it. Anyone else have an interpretation on?
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Jill, as well too. And if I'm interpreting the question correctly, I know that our organization is working on, at least from our engineering community, on publishing an engineering progression path. So that was a lot of work that we did this year with the engineering group. We had a mix of some individual contributors and some leaders that we formed a sprint team together on, and then did some deeper work with some senior leaders in our engineering group to really outline different streams of technical or managerial track. Because prior, this group in our organization really felt that development was really if you went into leadership, and didn't really see a clear technical stream. And so for us, from a progression level perspective, yes, we've done that work on that lens, and we're just going through the rollout right now with the engineering community. But that would be something that we would publish from just a high level perspective to say, you could come into the organization from an EIT and then, potentially go to 2 different tracks, and you've got those options available to you from a career planning, and a development planning perspective. Yeah, so broad-based from that group,
Got it.
yes, but individually, yes, I totally agree with you, Sheila.
Yeah, I hear you now. A big part of that is making sure you have a system to capture it, because it takes resources to keep that updated. And then skills and qualifications that you constantly know yours even is updated when there's a consideration or an agreement that you are progressing in your career. So that's the other part of the puzzle.
That's right.
Perspective is designing the system appropriately for it to be showed to the individual and organization.
Would you like to add anything?
No, I'm great.
Okay, so there is a shift in the way succession planning is perceived, and maybe this is also a good question to ask our audience, and they can comment in the chat box. From your respective examples, as organizations are organizations shifting any aspects of their current succession planning practices? And if so, why? And that's given that the audience may be at different stages of maturity within their own organizations. So perhaps Tisha, you can take this one.
Yes, we've talked a little bit about this, but
Yeah.
I think that what I'm definitely seeing and is definitely the critical roles identification for sure, and really understanding that. But I also think that there is a shift towards having more of the talent-based conversations through succession planning, really understanding development opportunities or development needs of individuals when we're talking about them from a talent perspective, and we're talking about them for next level roles, and what does that look like, and seeing that emergence of these talent reviews coming up and being integrated into the succession conversation. So yes, you're talking about future leaders for some of those leadership roles, but then now you're also talking about these critical roles and who are in those roles and where are they, and how do we see them, and then also just integrating this conversation into the next follow-up conversation as now how does that feed into workforce planning, and then how does that feed into your talent strategy. So having the your plan on what you do about that individual is not just from a one conversation. It's so many other conversations that link into what are the organization efforts that are put into development, career planning, recruiting, maybe even in how the organization looks from an org design perspective as well too. So that's what I would offer to that.
Nicole, would you like to comment?
No, I think Tisha did a great job capturing all of it. Yeah.
Okay, Sheila?
No, I'm good as well. I thought she did a really good job.
Okay, sounds good. So what are some of the challenges you have seen emerge as a result of bad succession planning? So is there barriers to success? What was the lessons learned? So I open it up to the panelists.
I can chime in. First and foremost, it's a plan. It's treated as an independent exercise. Mm-hmm. So you spend all the time coming up with this plan and you do absolutely nothing with it. And as we all know, then it starts losing its value and credibility, and people will not put the time into it. That is something that I have seen some of the challenges with it. And it's not tied to the rest of the system, as I mentioned, where you start to see some great conversations, and this is what was called out as well in the guidebook is, what would it look like to have a committee taking a look at all your succession planning candidates and really having a focus on how do we develop them for the next role. And it might not be upwards, it might be, hey, Sally is going to be role ready in 2 years, but why don't we put her under this stretch assignment, and being able to have that oversight and taking a look at how do we, first of all, activate against it, but as well, make sure that we're feeding it and making sure we're helping people get ready. Sheila touched upon this a little bit as well. And the other thing that one just has to be careful of is, our bias. Some people have been in the organization for a while, and we might have some perceptions. And, how do we make sure that we're entering those conversations? What are those checks and balances, that we're not bringing up what happened 5 years ago, that we have a growth mindset, a learning mindset around these people? Because we see that happen from time to time, and that we're making sure that we're entering those kind of conversations with an open mind and an open perspective.
That's great.
I'll just add on to that, because when we do planning, sometimes we forget to take on the lens around, are they willing and capable of moving forward with the plan too? So motivation wise, we do make those biased almost decisions, and that could set up the person not necessarily for success on where they want to go. Will make assumptions or not listen appropriately. So there's all these other little pieces that cause problems within it that aren't necessarily captured. So those nuances are important to keep in mind and talk through with the individual.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. There was a conversation that I was part of in a previous organization, and there was a perception that, okay, the role's ready, it comes to me, and what if I'm just not ready now? Like my stage in life, it's not where I want to be. And how do you make people feel like, how can people still feel safe and feel that they have some upward mobility in organization if it might not be the right time? And the other thing that I'm seeing as well is the shift between, okay, the role comes up, do we make people compete on it? Or do we just take those people because we've been developing them and putting them into place? And what are the pros and cons around that? And is that a mechanism for people to be able to say, okay, it's just not the right time for me, and that's okay? Having the perception that someone's competing for a role, does that set them up well for that next assignment? But these are some of the things that I'm observing it in real time and in an organization.
Oh, yeah. 100%. And then I'm adding on again to that, is that we have a bunch of employees that are going to retire over the next 5 years. And then the Gen X category, I'd say, or age range, there's not as many people as then millennials. So that's part of why people are saying, well, maybe I'm just not in the life stage where I am ready to take on that senior role. And then I have seen as well the competition of millennial that wants to have the role, and how do we keep that moving for the individual without causing a conflict that's not healthy? So that's very interesting, or demotivate the individual.
Yeah, and I would say I agree with both of your insights, and on the bias piece too, with respect to the millennials. I think that there's also I've seen this where there has been this bias around, in order to move into that next role and succeed, it's your time in the chair, right? Versus these capabilities and potential that you bring to the table, and recognizing like who's actually ever fully ready for that next leadership role. Like no one, right? Yeah. But it's the feeling is right for you, the timing is right, the body of work that you've done has prepared you, enabled you to be able to be like, I can step into that and do it. And of course, I'm going to learn and I'm going to grow along the way. So from the bias piece, I think the bias is huge. Thanks for bringing that up, Nicole, because and Sheila, because it's really a thing that I think many, I know we're really trying to integrate that and trying to really think about, busting some of these biases in these conversations. And I know our organization has been really promoting over the past few years, and even more so in the past 2 years, to really look at, how long have somebody been in a role, and if this person's indicated that they've got this interest in leadership, then let's see, as Nicole said, is there a stretch assignment we could get them onto where they're now getting exposed to other things, other bodies of work, other people, move them around. Is that the right move for them, sort of thing, right? And just try to just build this diversity of even just their own business knowledge in the organization, and go have a different perspective coming into a whole nother team and different work, and see how that goes for you, and then come back, because now when when that opportunity comes up, you'll just now have this broader experience, and you just more under your tool belt that's widened you out. But I think that if I were to flip off of the bias, one of the things I think, Sheila, you touched on, that is a fail that I've seen is when a person who is a successor, has been identified as a successor, has had no conversation with their leader about it, and it just doesn't even come up as a conversation at any point in time, yet they're talked about a lot. Other people see them as successors and moving into the organization, but they themselves have just not had that conversation, and so they just leave the organization if they don't see indicators that somebody has interest in me, or the organization is going to put some energies and interest in me to do something further here. Then I'll just look elsewhere. And so that's something that is a challenge, I would say, organizationally, for just the whole process of it all. But then from a talent perspective is when you lose the people that you consider to be top talent. And for us, we're a smaller organization, so we just have that challenge altogether on not having that opportunity for everybody to be able to move upwards. So we've been really trying to bake into, and with leaders, really like, hey, let's really just unpack this message around career development and development opportunities, that it does not have to be all vertical, and there's value and richness in the horizontal as well.
And that goes into the development of, if you're in this function, how do we get them experience and exposure to all the different other functions in order to be successful, instead of then, oh yes, now want them to take a larger scope of responsibility without setting them up for success. Because that's also a challenge I see now, is that it's like, here you go, and unfortunately things are changed, and life is changing drastically, as we know. Are we equipping them, to our points around cultural differences? Are we equipping them with the fact that the world is changing and it's more purpose driven? And so how do we talk to our employees around their well-being in different ways? And so is that what we consider a high potential? So all these getting to come out, right? Versus, are you a hard performer?
Right.
Which is how you usually would have come up through succession planning or replacement planning.
Extremely interesting. I'm just
cognizant.
Yeah. It seems so logical, yet it's so difficult to implement.
Yes.
Right? Like, as I'm hearing these conversations, I'm just cognizant of time. I think it would be a great opportunity now for the audience to ask some questions. So I open up the floor. The chat box is open. So let's just give a few seconds. I mean, I'm always interested in hearing from the subject matter experts themselves, like yourselves. Is there anything that you can suggest based on your experience to new, like, HR leaders and business professionals that you can, say or comment on in this regard?
I'll give my one advice on mistakes I've made. And that is, if you keep planning without checking in with your units, and as you're just going to keep chasing and writing, the
Yeah.
people's needs, but nothing's progressing. So my advice is always make sure you reach out to your business units and have more of the conversation versus filling out the checklists all the time.
Yes, I 100% agree on that, Sheila. And I would also add to, in that reach out, your business leaders as well. So, you know, have the conversations with the senior leaders of that line organization, getting ready to go into this process, understand with them what's going to be helpful for their team. I would say that, you know, in our experience, we've got different teams engage and think in very different ways. So we have some teams that we have to really set up a whole bunch of thinking for them first, and pre-thinking, and here's some questions, and get them in the zone so that they can really, when we come to the conversation, they've kind of thought through all of that already and are not necessarily on the spot when we're in discussion. So those are that's probably the best advice that I would get. And just like, and always be listening what you're hearing in the conversation, because I can tell you how many times you go through I've gone through Succession, and it's like, hey, you know, you're prepared, you've got all this stuff, and you go through a conversation, you're like, wow, hey, mental note that one for next year or next conversation, or yeah, I think we want to think about this. And I think as a practitioner, sometimes you're always in program mode too. So, you know, you do also need to let yourself be present in the moment, but also be thinking about, what are you hearing from the business? What are some questions that are coming up? Is there things that they're not understanding around the process that you can help enable? Is there something around internal programs that maybe will be more helpful or beneficial from a development perspective? There's so much things you get from that conversation, and being part of the conversation, I think is such a blessing to be able to be at that, you know, at the table with them as they're talking through their business and they're talking through the talent. So it's just an opportunity to always be thinking around, how do we help enable this process to be more fluid, more dynamic, or more meaningful, or where do we need to shift? I loved what Sheila said on how ACCO's really rethinking around what is that, you know, that top talent and the potential, because they're thinking about the well-being. And so, you know, running to the ground, and maybe even running yourself to the ground, is that something that we value? Like, is that really what we're valuing? And maybe we need to really think about that, because that's not really the case, right? And so, you know, the pandemic definitely has raised that to the forefront, where, you know, employees like across the world, I'm sure we were there, where there's moments you were like, wow, like having flexibility is everything. And then, you know, having to really just prioritize and say, there's so much that can just get done here. And moving forward, how does this shape and shift you? And many people, from a value proposition, you know, they're choosing employers, whether their current employer, are they going to stay, or new employers, where they're going to go, based on a well-being and how that organization positions well-being, and that mindset around well-being. And you know, because that's a form of taking care of your people, and also, you know, encouraging them to take care of themselves.
One of the lessons that I would offer is, perfection is not the goal.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not about having the perfect plan. It's about having continuous perfect conversations. And you know, just that's the goal, is have the conversations, continue to have them. Don't make it a plan. Don't put it on the table. Come back, revisit it, and figure out how to integrate it. I think too often as HR practitioners, we tend to make this process, and it's an HR process, and how can it be integrated? Back to Sheila's point, if you're talking about the financial outcomes each month, how do you bring in the conversation in there? Hey, Johnny is on this path. We've put him into these development assignments. How do we have the conversation about how he's doing, and just integrate it? And once we can start integrating our HR processes, then it will start to be seen as business processes, and it will just become part of the culture. So find small ways of being able to link it in, and perfection is not the goal.
So I actually have a great question that ties in with the conversations, and it's, have there been unexpected benefits as a result of your succession planning? I'll open up to the floor. I know, for example, like we're currently relaunching, we relaunched our leadership accord on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there's a big push with focus on hiring and promoting a more diverse workforce, for example. Would you see that in your workplaces, for example?
I truly believe if we have a bit more transparency on how we do succession planning within an organization, including, you know, all of yours, you will see engagement go up. You see your net promoter score of your company go up. I truly, truly believe that.
Yeah.
I have
And
specific data to endorse it 100%, but I do see it benefit that.
Absolutely, Sheila. And what we know is when your employees are engaged, you have better business outcomes. So it's part of the value chain. I think the other thing as well is, and I touched upon this when we opened up our conversation, is it's also a value prop. It's something that can be an attraction piece for, you know, people coming in and joining your organization. If they know that this is something that you put stock in value into, I kind of laugh a little bit, you know, our security team can't be like, oh, come work at NMAX because we have great security systems, but we can come work at NMAX because, you know, we care about developing our people. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Exactly. Yeah, agreed. It's quite interesting because we do need to have it in the employee value proposition more. I feel that at least. So it's equally as important to know we're developing our people, like more people obsessed, and as much as we do our clients.
Tisha, anything you would like to add?
I think that Nicole and Sheila really highlighted the key points there. Like I wouldn't have anything to add further, but just really just adding supports to the employer value proposition, and you know, you're as an organization trying to position yourself as an employer of choice. It's not so much about, you know, what you say about yourself. It's about the experiences that employees are having, and employee experiences is a whole thing in itself. It's you know, within HR, it definitely is an emerging, well, I won't say it's emerging, it's been there, but it's definitely been propelled to a lot of conversations around, you know, how we look at those, similar to how companies who have customers look at their customer experience. It's taking that customer experience lens and now shifting it to the employee. And we know, without needing to have any data, you know that when you are transparent about things that are happening in the organization, you do have more buy-in, as Sheila said. And so, you know, with a process like this, and I think Nicole had said it earlier, or Sheila, forgive me, I can't remember who said it, but it's just like grappling between the being extremely transparent and allowing this process where you're putting energies into certain decisions around certain people. And sometimes, you know, these positions just don't get posted because you're inactivating your succession plan. But I think, you know, to the point on transparency, as long as that's really well crafted in your organization and people really understand that, and even just on the concept of succession planning, just understand that, yes, you know, there's thoughts and there's decisions that are being made. It's just a plan. Like as Nicole said, this is this year, you know, next year things could change and pivot, and that's okay. And it's not a fixed, it's something that we are thinking of at this point in time, and providing that the employee has interest in this space as well too, then we want to try to see what we can do from a development perspective. But yeah, I think that it ultimately, it really does drive up your your Net Promoter Score internally in your own organization, and also what people externally see you as, and hear from others as to whether or not other people will promote your organization as a place of work.
Okay, I'm just looking at the time and I'm afraid I have to stop it here. So, just to sum up, so what I'm hearing for various reasons, and most recently because of the pandemic, as organizations are starting to plan for the return to the office and to the office setting, that is, and what that looks like for the future of work, organizations should have a dedicated focus around succession planning, and one that is simply not a replacement planning process anymore. It's just not the leadership roles that are critical. Organizations need to determine what those mission critical positions are. We should be approaching our people and talent capital needs as wisely as our financial capital needs. One size fits all approach to succession planning does not work. A succession planning strategy in the absence of a development strategy will result in little traction, and that succession planning needs to be fully entrenched in a workplace culture. I also heard the key to adding value and creating forward action is the development of talent. And regardless of how mature your succession planning process may be, the Succession Planning Guidebook is a very helpful tool, particularly when it comes to mitigating risks. So if there aren't any further comments, I would like to thank our panelists for taking the time to talk all things succession planning with us here today and sharing your insights. I found the conversations to be not only very timely, but fascinating. I would like to thank our audience for joining us. I would also like to thank the Government of Alberta in partnership with the Government of Canada for supporting this project. Again, you can find the Succession Planning Guidebook on our website at electricityhr.ca. And again, if you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to reach out to us directly. We are here to support you, and we are supported by a great team of individuals across the sector, across the country, that can help us help you. So I sincerely thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.